The biggest criminal fraud heist in British history in the heart of Westminster.
Gerald Carroll was once head of Britain's third largest private business. The value of his empire was estimated at £500 million. Although something of a recluse, he had powerful and influential contacts. At the height of his powers, his organisation consisted of 85 companies, collections of art, cars, wine and stamps, as well as a fine library. It was all run under an umbrella trust, the Carroll-Foundation. Today he is bankrupt, ruined, he says, by fraudsters who systematically robbed him of almost everything. And he believes his life is in danger. He's reported several attacks to the police. After 2 years of campaigning, the Serious Fraud Office has finally begun to look into Carroll's extraordinary story. And for the first time, he's decided to tell it publicly to Sky News.
I actually started on my own. I mean, this has never been really discussed, but I mean, I started at 18, 19, like any young man. I mean, I wanted to try and get myself a nice sports car, and all my friends had sports cars, and I didn't have one. I just had £150 my father gave me. And so I sort of bought and sold a few motor cars, and I did some demolition work, and, you know, and accumulated some capital.
Gerald Carroll is proud of his Anglo-Irish ancestry. One was a signatory to the American Declaration of Independence. Carroll's grandfather, a friend of Henry Ford, built homes for Dagenham workers, a house a day, a street a week, it was said. But Gerald Carroll didn't inherit the family business. He built one of his own.
There was never a cheque given to me. Right. There was never a settlement of funds to me. My father was always very strict about his views on you know, the monetary aspect, which really is reflected in how I conducted my affairs. I mean, you know.
So the rapid rise of the Carroll Group of companies, which you were in charge of,
was through my own effort.
Carroll's gift was for spotting property opportunities, like the Farnborough Air Base, which he redeveloped for the MOD. He also had a knack of acquiring planning permission and City of London funding, sometimes with little collateral.
I could see by 1986 that, you know, I was going to become an extremely wealthy individual, separate to my father's interest. I just felt that, you know, this thing is going to get very large, and so I decided to settle the whole of my business interests in a trust.
Carroll had international ambitions as well. He was one of the first Western businessmen to spot the opportunities presented by the fall of the communist bloc. This is him signing a trade agreement with the then Russian Vice President Alexander Rutskoy. Carroll enjoyed the image of the globe-trotting deal-maker. But there was something else. He hints at connections with the security services here and in the United States, and at behind-the-scenes roles in the Northern Ireland peace process.
I was a go-between, I suppose, between various parties, but predominantly my interests and my influence really was with the paramilitary side of the Irish.
1988, London Docklands. Carroll was behind a spectacular Jean-Michel Jarre open-air concert in aid of charity. Carroll himself proudly escorted the guest of honour, Princess Diana, to her seat. He had good relations too with Prince Charles and the Prince's Trust. This was Carroll the philanthropist, another role he relished. He supported 40 good causes. This event cost millions, but in the end barely broke even, and Carroll stumped up a donation for the charity out of his own pocket. Nevertheless, his businesses were thriving. He bought Warren Park, a fabulous 500-acre stud at Newmarket with a fine house. This was Carroll's country seat, and it certainly befitted his image as a jet-setting entrepreneur. He had a private box at the Newmarket racecourse. He listed his recreations as racing, sailing and shooting, but he had another obsession: fast cars. The Carroll collection, mainly Ferraris and Lamborghinis, was housed in a lavish outbuilding at Warren Park. They had their own curator and were for Carroll a source of great pride and satisfaction. Visitors were regularly dispatched to Newmarket to admire the cars, followed by an afternoon at the races. In truth, Gerald Carroll was a rare visitor to the Newmarket races. A workaholic, he spent most of his time here at Carroll House in Westminster, his business headquarters. Today the building is home to the Federation of Small Businesses. Back then, as Carroll House, it was HQ for a very big business indeed. Downstairs, Gerald Carroll had his private office, from where he orchestrated his various personal interests. Upstairs, a small team of trusted executives ran the group. In 1992, cracks started to show. Carroll's project to build a shopping centre over the A1 at Hatfield in Hertfordshire went disastrously wrong. The construction costs overran by £30 million. The local council was sued for letting Carroll break a tenant mix agreement, and shoppers stayed away.
It was, from an engineering point of view, ahead of its time, and on reflection, I think it pushed the envelope of constructability beyond its real capabilities of construction. The roof was put on the wrong way round, and you know, there were delays and cost overruns that were just horrendous. There was going to be a loss on that project of around £50 million.
The Hatfield debacle was a severe blow, not a knockout punch. But the property market was by now in recession. A former employee said that although money was still coming into the group, there never seemed to be any cash to do anything. At this point, the Carroll Group embarked on a restructuring programme. Company's house records show that many of the assets were funneled into a new company, the Urban Finance Corporation. It's at this point that things start getting extremely murky. Many of the Carroll companies were renamed, whilst new dummy companies were set up, but using the original name. For example, Ely Property became Winskirk, while Winskirk re-emerged as Ely Property.
We have about 18 companies, and I say about because one has to be careful on statements, but 18, 17, 19 companies which are dummy, fake companies, of which I've seemed to have been a director of, which I'm afraid have been impregnated with forged signatures of my name, and obviously very serious criminal administration, which is obviously a function of actually erecting these dummy screen companies, which is screening off some of the very serious criminal fraud that's being conducted here. What they do is they use structures to put assets in, to then charge those assets which are sitting in those structures to fill the holes as they start bleeding the money out, as they raise more money, and this balloon gets bigger and bigger, and then the whole thing explodes.
Inexplicably, Gerald Carroll himself says he was shut out. He knew nothing of these developments, and he claims his signature was either forged or a signature stamp was used.
When you're running 85 companies, you really haven't got a clue. Once you have scale, you have to rely, you are trusting on the individuals closely around you. So I thought I had a grip of what was going on. Clearly what was going on was not actually what was being presented to me, because I was being marginalised. There's no question about that.
How was that happening?
Well, I suppose, putting it in simple language, I was being refused access to the books and records. Not that I was asking for the books and records in a direct, narrow sense. I was asking for information which basically wasn't coming, and it was all sort of going around in circles, which I suppose in a fiduciary sense is being refused access to books and records. I'm talking about late 92, early 93.
Suddenly, Carroll was in serious trouble. His companies had run up big debts with HSBC Midland Bank, debts personally guaranteed by Carroll himself. The bank pulled the plug, and in 1995, Carroll, seeing the writing on the wall, declared himself bankrupt.
What transpired is that in January 1995, I find myself going into a personal bankruptcy. Another 125 million of assets were vaporising in front of my eyes, including separately my home at Newmarket, whole rafts of the family art collection, Carroll aircraft at Farnborough, the aeronautical collection, and then a rolling sub-assembly of collateral explosions through 95, 96, being other parts of the empire exploding and dissolving and disappearing.
When you say being vaporised, I mean, what was actually happening?
Going into bankruptcy, just collapsing, assets disappearing, the office disappearing, you know. I mean, just complete mayhem.
Well, in most cases,
mayhem.
these were
Total mayhem.
these were viable businesses.
Viable businesses, more